It was a rainy evening in downtown Cleveland when Marcus Hayes pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the 7-Eleven. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering intermittently, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Marcus was tired. Long hours at the warehouse, a paycheck barely enough to cover rent, and a life that felt like it was slipping through his fingers. All he wanted was a quick cup of coffee before heading home. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Inside the store, the cashier, a nervous teenager named Luis, looked up as Marcus approached the counter. Behind him, a man in a hoodie fumbled with the candy bars, glancing around like a predator stalking its prey. A gunshot rang out. Panic erupted. Shouts, the screech of tires, the smell of smoke and burnt gunpowder. And then the police arrived. Detective Leonard Graves was a seasoned officer, known for his sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. He had a reputation for solving cases quickly, even if it meant bending the rules. That night, he was called to the scene, and the chaos was already in motion. Witnesses shouted, pointing fingers. Someone said they saw a man in a dark hoodie, running from the scene. Someone else mentioned a car parked suspiciously near the lot. Marcus was in the wrong place at the wrong time. His dark hoodie, his tired eyes, his nervous hands, all the signs pointed to him in the frenzy of the moment. He tried to explain, to speak, but the noise swallowed him. "Step aside." Graves barked, grabbing Marcus by the arm. I didn't," Marcus stammered, but it was too late. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. The world had gone silent, except for the pounding of his own heart. In the station, the interrogation room was cold, the fluorescent lights harsh. Graves leaned across the table, his gaze sharp. "Tell me what you were doing at the 7-Eleven tonight," he demanded. "I was buying coffee," Marcus protested. "I didn't even see the guy with the gun. I swear." Graves didn't believe him. He never did. The witness statements were shaky, conflicting, and convenient. Marcus's own fear and confusion were taken as guilt. Within hours, Marcus Hayes, a man with no criminal record, no history of violence, and no motive, was charged with armed robbery and attempted murder. The trial was a blur. His lawyer, overworked and underpaid, tried to fight, but the evidence was stacked against him, or at least, that's how it seemed. Marcus's protests fell on deaf ears. The jury, sympathetic but cautious, found him guilty. The sentence was brutal, 15 years in a maximum security prison. As the gavel came down, Marcus felt the weight of his life being ripped away. He was innocent, yet the world had decided otherwise. His family's pleas, his mother's tears, his younger sister's screams, they didn't matter. The system had moved, and he was powerless. The prison walls were cold and unyielding. Marcus learned quickly that survival wasn't about innocence, it was about strength, strategy, and patience. Days blended into nights, months into years. He became quiet, methodical, almost invisible. He read everything he could get his hands on, law books, psychology texts, crime novels, anything to keep his mind sharp. He kept a journal, detailing every injustice, every memory of the night he was arrested. Every entry ended with the same question: how would the world react if they knew the truth? Outside, life moved on. Friends drifted away. His family struggled, sometimes angry, sometimes defeated, but always carrying the shadow of Marcus's absence. He became a ghost in their lives, a name whispered in sorrow. Inside, he watched the world through the tiny television in the common room. He saw headlines of crime, politics, scandals, but he never saw his own story reported fairly. Years passed. 10, 12, 13 years, and still, the man who had robbed him of his freedom remained free. It was Marcus's 13th year behind bars when a call came from his lawyer, a miracle, a spark in the darkness. New evidence had emerged. Surveillance footage, overlooked and hidden, finally cleared his name. A man fitting the description of the real robber had confessed to a similar crime elsewhere, his DNA matching the gun found at the 7-Eleven. Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk, shaking. The years of anger, despair, and disbelief poured out in a torrent of tears. He was finally free. The day of his release, the prison gates opened like a cage swinging wide, and Marcus stepped into the sunlight of a world that had moved on without him. He was older, hardened, changed, but he was free. His first moments outside were surreal. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, of life continuing without him. A crowd had gathered, reporters, curious neighbors, and family members, many of whom he hadn't seen since that fateful day. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered, but Marcus's focus was singular: to rebuild, to reclaim, to live again. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. 3 weeks after his release, Marcus was walking through the city, taking in the world he'd missed, the skyscrapers, the bustling streets, the endless chatter of people oblivious to the injustice he had suffered. And then he saw it. A massive billboard, towering above the highway, illuminated by floodlights. Marcus squinted. His heart skipped a beat. It was his face. His name. A mugshot. The billboard screamed. Wanted, for the crime he didn't commit. Or so he thought. The reality was even stranger. Below the photo, the text read, "Meet Marcus Hayes, wrongly accused, now fighting for justice, support his story at hayesforjustice.org." It was a campaign, someone had championed his cause, someone had believed in him all these years. But who? And why? Marcus stared, frozen, as the car sped by, honking, unaware of the story behind the face they saw. A mix of relief, confusion, and fury swelled inside him. His life had been stolen, yet here it was, publicly recognized, his injustice made visible for the first time. The billboard was more than a sign, it was a message. And Marcus knew his journey wasn't over. The fight for justice, for recognition, for rebuilding his life, it had only just begun. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off the billboard. The rain had started again, light drops splattering on the concrete, but he barely noticed. His mind raced. Who could have done this? Who had fought for him when the world turned its back? He pulled out his phone and typed hayesforjustice.org into the browser. The website was simple but powerful. It told his story in detail, his arrest, the trial, the years behind bars, and finally, his exoneration. At the bottom, a single name was highlighted, Detective Sarah Collins, a former officer who had left the force years ago. Marcus froze. Detective Collins? He had never met her, never spoken to her. Why would she care? The phone rang before he could think twice. Marcus Hayes, a calm, firm voice asked. Yes, Marcus replied cautiously. Marcus, this is Sarah Collins. Well, I don't know if you remember me. I was on the force the night you were arrested. I knew from the start you were innocent, but I couldn't prove it then. I've been fighting quietly to make this right. The billboard, the website, it's all part of making sure the truth is seen. Marcus sank onto a nearby bench, his hands trembling. Why? Why would you do this after all these years? Because someone has to stand for the truth, Marcus. And because no one deserves what you went through. The next day, Marcus returned to the neighborhood where it all began. The 7-Eleven looked smaller, insignificant even. But the memories were alive, sharp, bitter, and haunting. People recognized him now, pointing, whispering, taking photos. Marcus felt exposed, but a strange sense of power coursed through him. He had survived. He had prevailed. And then he saw him. Detective Leonard Graves, older but unmistakable, leaning against a lamppost. The same cold, calculating eyes that had judged him so harshly were fixed on Marcus. Hayes, Graves said, his voice low. You're out. Yes, I am, Marcus replied evenly. And I'm done being a victim. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Graves smirked, a mix of arrogance and discomfort. The system works. You should be grateful you're free. Marcus laughed, a sound sharp and cutting. Grateful? You ruined 13 years of my life. You stole my freedom. Grateful? No. I want accountability. Marcus didn't stop at words. With Sarah Collins's help, he gathered evidence, documents, witness testimonies, and the newly discovered surveillance footage. Graves, once untouchable, found himself facing scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. Internal investigations were reopened, public outrage grew, and the man who had once wielded power over Marcus's life was now under the microscope. Graves tried to defend himself, citing procedure and miscommunication, but the truth was undeniable. He had acted recklessly, and Marcus had suffered. Just when Marcus thought the fight was ending, he received a letter. No return address. Inside was a simple note. We're not done yet. There's more to your story than even you know. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. Midnight. Marcus hesitated. Fear, curiosity, and anger warred inside him. Who could it be? The real criminal from that night? Someone else who had been involved? Or was it another trap? The night was heavy with tension as Marcus approached the abandoned warehouse. Shadows stretched across the broken windows. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, a single figure stepped forward. It was Luis, the teenager who had been the cashier that fateful night. His hands were shaking, his face pale. I didn't tell the whole truth back then, Luis confessed. I saw someone else in the store that night. I was too scared of what Graves would do. But I've watched all these years, and I can't stay silent anymore. Luis handed Marcus a file. Inside were photos, notes, and confessions. Everything Marcus had suspected, and more, all documented in painful, undeniable detail. Marcus felt a mixture of rage and relief. The final piece of the puzzle was in his hands. The real truth, the full truth, was finally coming to light. Weeks later, Marcus stood once again under the billboard, his face now smiling, Not from fear, but from triumph. The story had gone viral. The officer who had arrested him unjustly faced justice. Graves had been suspended, fined, and publicly shamed. Marcus's family, long haunted by his absence, finally saw him restored, vindicated, alive. The world that had once abandoned him now watched as he reclaimed his life. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. His voice, once silenced, was now louder than ever. And for every Marcus Hayes out there, the message was clear: truth cannot be buried forever.